Hey Mountain View, super excited to be with you this week. We're continuing to go through the book of Nehemiah. Looks like we'll be in there forever, but we're going to try our best to move quickly today. We are going to back up in chapter 5 and go through the verses quickly and get to a major point, try to finish up chapter 5 today and go from there. But I am excited about it. Here's the reason why. At the very end of this chapter, we're going to talk about Nehemiah's motivation through everything that he's doing. We've been talking about rebuilding the nation, re-energizing the nation in a Christian way, getting involved in our schools, getting involved in every facet of the community and in every facet of the nation. We've been talking about that, but hopefully not just talking about that, but beginning to plan in our minds how we're going to do that. I mean, there are a ton of things we're thinking of as a church on how we can influence our culture, and I hope that we can move forward in doing that. It is an absolute pleasure to be in the Word as the Word is teaching us through this, and we look back and we see that ancient cultures and the Hebrew culture, these Jews were working their tails off trying to rebuild a wall and trying to rebuild something that had not been there for ages, trying to rebuild a culture. They were doing their best to do that, and we found ourselves just last week looking at the fact that they were working so hard on that wall that they were beginning to neglect the very needs that they had back home. And there's something about that, in the sense that, there's a necessity to have jobs and to make money and to do well at those jobs, work as though you're working for Christ, do those things as though you're working for Christ because you are working for Christ. In the long run, it may be humans that you're working for on the outside, but as it stands, God is watching you and what you're doing, your influence, and where you are working outside of the church. And we need those jobs to pay our bills, all of those things. Here was what was happening in Nehemiah's time. They were working very, very hard to rebuild walls. And they were neglecting, though, those jobs they had that would help them pay the bills. On that note, there were some that were able to work regular jobs, certainly, and there were some that were able to provide for their families, for food and such as that. But there were others that were becoming destitute as a result of having to work on the wall. Now, we can spend so much time, pastors being called to the ministry. There are bivocational pastors. There are pastors who enter full time, and they are to be compensated if possible from their churches. Of course, we can go into the biblical stuff about that, but here were people, these were laymen, these were regular folks working on this wall that had been called to redo and rebuild, families working on them, and in the meantime, they didn't have some of these regular jobs that were able to pay them enough to continue on, to feed their families and such as that. So that's where we were last week, but we're going to go backwards. We're going to be very, very quick moving through these verses until we get to, about halfway through the chapter, and then we'll slow down because we just went through this last week. If you've not been following us, we're talking about reestablishing a culture in this world, but right now we're in the details of what's happening to the people. A lot of times we'll say to ourselves, well, the work of the Lord's got to be neglected because I've got to go and do some of this other stuff to pay my bills, and then we go too far to that side, and then there's that side where we're not taking care of the things at home, we're not taking care of the things that we need to be taken care of, and because we're spending 24/7 doing stuff rather than ministry, rather than actually infiltrating the areas that we are in. If you're in a job, you can do God's work where you are if you'll do God's work. If you will witness, if you will share, if you will somehow get scripture or get the things of God moved and pushed into wherever you are, that's infiltration and you're doing God's work. Certainly should be involved in your church. We desperately need that as churches, our people to be involved. But there's a balance in here where we take the things of God that we have done at the church and move them into society and into our culture and into the things that we do on a regular basis in the secular world. Taking Christ into the secular world and infiltrating those areas is absolutely necessary. It hasn't been but just a few weeks ago that what they're calling an insurrection, which was just a protest up there with a couple of folks that got way out of hand, But here's the thing, though. Those people were in an area, they were taking a message to that area and trying to let other people hear that message. If Christians were just bold enough just to, not to go and be violent or vandalism or anything like that for any stretch of the imagination, but if we were bold enough to march like that in millions and tell others about Jesus as we're doing that, take all the grief, take all the shame, take all those things that may come with that, and actually go out there and do that in the world, then this world would change. It could change if we were bold enough to do that. So here it is. Take the job that you have in this world, find a way to get Jesus into it. Say, Ryan, I'm retired. Find a way to get Jesus into your everyday life, wherever you go to eat, wherever you go to spend time, any of those things. Pastors, you need to double down. You need to double down and work very, very hard to see these amazing things happen in your church, but outside that, see amazing things happen in the world around you. We are in a mess. We are in a mess, and more of a mess than we were when we started this series with Ezra and Nehemiah. We are certainly in an awful, awful mess. We could go into the cultural issues, and maybe we will. But right now, being in Nehemiah, being in chapter 5, we're talking about what's happening to the people, and there's some very interesting things that are going on here. And so we'll start right now. Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 1. And there was a great cry of the people and their wives against their brethren, the Jews. So here we have quickly, just like we were talking about last week, the people, the wives are coming to the leaders, to Nehemiah, the leaders there, and saying, look, there's a problem here. We're starving to death, and we'll see that in the next verse. Nehemiah chapter 5, verse 2 says, for there were that said, we, our sons and our daughters are many. Therefore we take up corn for them, that we may eat and live. It's like, hey, listen, guys, we got to live. We got to eat, and we're not able to pay those bills if we're constantly working on this right here. We got to figure out something. But it wasn't so much that they were working on the wall. They never really complained about them working on the wall. Here's what they were complaining about. They were complaining about the oppression of those people who were charging them. Now, we'll talk about why in just a second, okay? Let's do verse 3, because we went through these, and then we'll go through some other verses in just a little bit. All right. Some also there was said, we have mortgaged our lands, vineyards, and houses that we may buy corn because of the dearth. Now, there's a famine. There's a famine. We don't know whether or not there was a famine because of, just a horrible economy, whether it was famine because of weather, or whether it was famine, which is most likely this reason, that the enemy lands that were around them were starving them. Basically, you can't get to them to get them the goods that they need, and all of these things like that. So it wasn't so much that their people were working on the wall. That was part of it, that they couldn't go out and make a great living. But there was another thing. There was a dearth. There was a famine. There was this thing going on, and it happens so many times when a nation goes through where it is a sinful nation, where it is not following God. I'm talking about outside countries and such, and even in the sense of the Jews, even in times where they are following God, there are some times where there's famine, okay? They were following the statutes of God. They were following what God wanted to do and rebuilding the wall, but the enemy was causing famine in their land. And so then they realized, oh my goodness, I don't know how much we can take this. We've got to go to Nehemiah and the leaders. Leaders, be ready. So listen, and here's the reason you need to be ready. The reason you need to be ready is because when you are in the battle, when you are trying to take back a nation, and I mean spiritually take back a nation, when you're trying to do that, there is going to be famine at times. There's going to be spiritual dearth. There's going to be storms. There's going to be battles. There's going to be pain. There's going to be suffering. There's going to be all those things. And you have to be ready for that very thing. Don't say, I'm not expecting anything bad to happen because my God's got it. He's got it in his hands. Yes, he has it in his hands. Go ahead and expect the storms, but you can make it through the storms, and you can be victorious, and you can be blessed more than you ever thought, more than you ever imagined, okay? Doesn't mean you're not going to have storms. You will have them if you're doing God's will. You will suffer in some way and somewhere along the way because you were following the Lord. That's okay, because he's going to get you through. He's going to get you to it. He's going to get you through it. He's going to get you on the other side of it, okay? That's what's going to happen. So here it is. They're complaining. They're saying, listen, there's a famine out here. Our folks are on the walls, and that's all well and good, but we can't even make a living, all right? So here it goes. Go to verse 3, that's where they're buying corn and there's a dearth, okay? Verse 4, There were also that said, okay, so there's many people there. They're saying many different things. There's a famine. Come on, help me. You can see the city council meeting or the county council meeting, and you see all these people, and different people are saying different things at different times. That's what's happening right here. All right. There were also that said, we have borrowed money for the king's tribute, and that upon our lands and vineyards. What have they been now, or what are they doing? They're borrowing money to pay taxes. That's even worse, okay? Because think about this. Persia allowed the Jews to come in and rebuild this wall and to rebuild, establish a city, if you will, and to do their own thing. But they did not allow them to be free from taxes, from being able to pay taxes. So look, we got to pay taxes back to Persia, and we're having to borrow money to do it. We don't, we don't have any jobs. The jobs are dried up. We're basically bankrupt, and many of us are bankrupt. We're mortgaging this and we're mortgaging that just to buy corn. Folks, look at this nation now and the amount of debt it's in. Look at the nation now and the amount of debt it's in, okay? We talk about 27 trillion like it's no big deal. Folks, it is a big deal, especially when they're expecting us to be at 49 trillion in just 4 more years. At $49 trillion in debt. Okay, I've said this to the other crew, the 11 o'clock, 6 o'clock crew at church. Let me say it to you. If you were to spend $1 a second, $86,400 a day, okay, it would take you 32 years to spend $1 billion. And that's at $86,400 a day, about. Now, this is all approximate. It would take you 32,000 years to spend $1 trillion at $1 a second. $86,400 a day would take you 32,000 years. With $27 trillion in debt, this nation is. It took us all of American history, all the way to 1980, to be $1 trillion in debt. And in the past 40 years, we've added $26 trillion. It took all of American history to get 1, and now it's taken 40 years to get to 27, and they're saying we'll be at 49 in 4. Folks, it's unsustainable. There is going to be a moment, I don't know when, but there is going to be a call, there's going to be a reckoning here. Chickens are coming home to roost. And when it does, I don't know what that looks like. It's going to look a little bit like this, but more like the Old Testament story where the Israelites were eating each other. And a story of people eating one another, cooking. It was just awful, awful times. And the king tearing his clothes, finding out this awful thing about his people, that they were so hungry that they would eat each other, and eating donkeys' heads and all these different things just to have something of nourishment to go in their bodies. Folks, I'm not sensationalizing and saying America will ever come to something like that, but I will promise you this. We may come to an awful lot of people dying if this economy collapses and there's no system of getting food anywhere, okay, except to get it from your government, which will demand everything you have in order to get that food. It's unsustainable. It's unsustainable, but that's another subject for another day. All right, so here we are. We're in the midst of this. We're in the midst of a famine. We're in the midst of a dearth. We're in the midst of this trouble. And they're coming to him and saying, listen, we're even mortgaging our homes. We're doing all that just to pay taxes to Persia. Okay? So there we go. Verse 5. Yet now our flesh is the flesh of our brethren, our children as their children, and lo, we bring into bondage our sons, our daughters to be servants, and some of our daughters are brought into bondage already. Neither is it in our power to redeem them, for other men have our lands and vineyards. We've had to give up our land and vineyards because we have defaulted on our loans, basically. We've said we're not going to be able to pay this loan. We can't do it. We're not making it. It's not working. It's not happening. Okay? And so we're not able to pay these bills, so they have our vineyards and our lands now. We're having to sell off our kids to be servants just so we can pay the bills. Having to sell our kids off. You're selling off kids' future right now, America. You're selling your kids' future right out from under them. And here's the thing, we're talking all about free this, free that, free education, free all these things. No, nothing's free, folks. Somebody has to pay the cost. Somebody has to pay the cost. But here's the thing that's bad about this. We can't even catch up with the interest. You're selling a future away. The government can't forgive all loans. all of their school loans. They keep talking about we're gonna forgive all these loans because they need the interest just to make payments to other countries who own our debt. Another subject, I know, but this is similar to what it's saying here. It said we have sold our kids off to slavery and we can't even buy them back because we don't have vineyards and we don't have our lands anymore. Nehemiah is probably shocked at this point. Well, he is, in fact, shocked at this point. Nehemiah is sitting here listening to these people saying this, and he's like, whoa, how did it get to this before I ever heard this? That never needs to be the case, that the one in charge is the last one to know. Okay, he's seeing these people come to him and say, listen, you know, I can't afford this. I've sold my daughter. I've sold my son. I can't get my vineyard back. I can't get my land back. It's a mess, folks. It's a mess. And this country has got to realize, America has to realize that we have to do something about it. Now, we probably will not do what Nehemiah is talking about here, but I'll tell you what was biblical for this time for the Jewish people. As we keep going. That was verse 5. Let's move to verse 6. And I was very angry when I heard their cry in these words. Nehemiah is shocked. He's angry. This should not be happening. We're trying to rebuild a wall, and these people know better than this to be happening. Now, not only were they having to pay taxes, they were having to pay interest, exorbitant interest, to people they were borrowing money from. All right? Verse 7. Then I consulted with myself and rebuked the nobles and the rulers and said unto them, ye exact, and we'll just simply say interest, ye exact interest, every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. That means he brought all the people together, and he brought the nobles together, and he said, hey guys, we've got this going over here, we've got this going over here, this is the reason this is happening, this is the reason this is happening, these people are starving, they can't do this, and it's because of you guys, you're exacting interest on them. You say, well, Ron, that's perfectly normal. But the Jewish law was this. The Jewish law said if you were a Jew and you were loaning money to a Jew, you were not supposed to charge interest. Now, did many of them do it? Yes, of course they did, because not everybody was a believer in the Jewish law. It's just like today, not everyone's a Christian, okay? And not even one who professes to be a Christian acts like a Christian. Same here. It's the same here. There were plenty of places that would loan them money at interest. But according to God's law, if you followed God and you loaned money Jew to Jew, you were not to charge interest. If it was a foreigner, you could charge interest. If it was outside of the faith, you could charge interest, but you could not charge interest to those who were Jews. But they did it anyway. And look, there were places in ancient cultures, okay, and I'm sure there were in this. There were places in ancient cultures that would charge up to 50% interest on these loans. Now, I don't know exactly what they were charging here. We don't have that. We just know that Nehemiah's ticked because he finds out they've been charging them enormous amounts of interest. No way for them to get out of the debt. The payday loans, the car title loans, all these things, it's impossible for them to get out of this. And if they do get out of it, they paid me 3 times what I've loaned them. Okay? Makes some people very wealthy. I get it. And look, they can't get a loan from somewhere else, so you say, hey, look, I'm doing them a service. They're going to pay me for it, but I'm just telling you what God's law says. This is simply saying, you should not, and here's the thing. We understand there are banks, we're paying interest on things, we're paying interest, and we understand it, and we're not oppressed. If you're able to make your payments, there's no oppression there, but there are an awful lot of people that are being taken advantage of. Okay, yes, they're making their own decisions. That's another sermon, another teaching, another day. They're making their own decisions, and they're in those situations. Many of us have been in financial straits at times, so we understand where some of this is coming from. But it is very enticing to see those loans and see what's going on with that, and realize that this is an absolute mess, and God is not happy. When we talk about the oppression of the poor, we're talking about the working poor. We're talking about those people trying to do something with their lives, and exorbitant interest is being on them, is being put upon them, and they cannot make those payments. He says, I consulted with myself. I like that. He said, I was talking with myself, the same verse, and I rebuked the nobles. He came and he said, listen, guys, this ain't cool. And the rulers, ye exact interest, every one of his brother, and I set a great assembly against them. I wanted the people to know what was going on, so I brought them in there to kind of pressure some folks and say, look, this isn't what you're supposed to be doing, okay, this is what's happening. So that is verse 7. We're going to move to verse 8. Verse 8 says this, and I said unto them, we, after our ability, have redeemed our brethren the Jews, which were sold unto heathen, And will ye even sell your brethren, or shall they be also sold unto us? Then held they their peace and found nothing to answer. The nobles, because of their interest, because of their different loans they had set out, because they had taken vineyards and they were like, look, man, you're in the straight. You can't pay your bills. Okay, that vineyard's mine. Okay, you can't pay your bills. That house is mine. And they take all these things and get wealthier and wealthier as a result of it. All right, so then Nehemiah says, I have been buying back these people. Nehemiah as cupbearer for the Persian king, okay? Nehemiah as cupbearer for the Persian king. Being cupbearer for the Persian king was apparently pretty lucrative. You got paid good money. You were tasting his food and drinking his wine and making sure that all that stuff wasn't poisoned, and you likely could die every time. Not likely, but because nobody was just constantly doing this, but there was a great possibility that you could die if someone had something against your king. All right? So, being the wine taster, the food taster, any of those things, that was accompanied with that. Apparently Persia, apparently Babylon, places like that paid a great deal of money to have that. Because Nehemiah says this. He says, I'm having to buy back these people. Oh, thank God for a Redeemer that bought me back. Thank God for a Redeemer, Jesus, who bought me back. Okay? And that's why Jesus says, listen, I bought all of these people back, and yet you continue to oppress them. You continue to oppress them. Oh, Christian, there's a lot to learn. There's a lot to learn about this. This isn't some kind of social justice garbage. I'm talking about just the reality of it. If God has redeemed us, how much more should we try to help those around us who are helping themselves? Okay? All right, or trying to help themselves. The working poor, and those who cannot help themselves. Oh my goodness, good stuff here. He said unto him, we after our ability, those of us who can, we're rebuying these slaves and sending them back to their families. Is it you're going to keep doing this, and we're just going to keep buying back these people? Or you're going to wipe me clean of all my money too, while I'm sitting here trying to redeem some of these people? I had no idea that you guys were responsible for all of this. I just knew I was buying back some people. That's what basically what Nehemiah is saying here. Verse 9 says this. Also I said, it's not good that ye do. Ought ye not walk in the fear of our God because of the reproach of the heathen and enemies? Basically, he said, can you just not fear God enough? Can you just for a moment realize what he is saying and know that you are in great danger of offending God? Because if you offend God, there are ramifications for that. There are certainly there's a discipline that comes with you displeasing God, with you angering God. And that's what he's saying. Guys, can't you see what you're doing and realize this is ticking God off? Can't you see it? Can't you see it with your plain eyes? That's exactly what you're doing, that you're ticking God off? You think that's a smart deal? Do you think that's a good idea? And so that's what he's saying right there. All right. He says this. He says in verse 11, restore, I pray you, to them even this day their lands, their vineyards, their olive yards, their houses, also 100th part of the money, meaning their interest. And what that probably means, and according to theologians, the 100th part, return that 100th part, their land, their vineyards, all this, and the 100th part. Well, it's probably that, the 100th part, meaning their interest, which would probably come up to like a 12% annual interest, which just seemed like, exorbitant and pushy. I mean, it was just awful for these people because they could not afford to do that. So he's saying, you return not only their lands and vineyards, but the interest they paid. Wow. Wow. I mean, that's a big request. That's a huge request. And 100 part of the money, and of the corn, the wine, the oil that you exact of them. So they were paying with the food they wanted to eat with. That's even worse. They were having to pay their bills with the very food that was meant for their table. All right. It says this, verse 12. Then said they, we will restore and require nothing of them, so we do as thou sayest. Then I called the priest and took an oath of them that they should do according to this promise. Now, I want to say a couple of things to this. They brought in the priest. They said, okay, guys, y'all are making a promise you're going to give them these lands back. Was that every one of them? Of course not. It makes it sound like maybe every single person decided, I can promise you, knowing human nature, there were some of them that said, you can forget that. And I'm sure they paid a price, a heavy price, for not doing that. But the majority of them, this group, we'll just say a group as a whole, decided we'll give them back their lands, their vineyards, everything. We're going to take care of that. We'll make it happen. So to make sure that this was about fear, the fear of the Lord, to make sure that they brought in the priest and had them take an oath in front of the priest. Will you return this to them? Will you return the lands to them? Will you stop this exorbitant interest? Will you do that? They said, yes, we will. He said, well, I'm going to bring in the priest and have you take that oath in front of the priest, and then we will see. Exactly what you mean. Okay. So the ones that were serious certainly took the oath and did it, and maybe there were some who even took the oath, who were taking the oath just because everybody else was, and then they didn't do what they said they were going to do. And I can promise you that God took care of that. All right. And then again, that's speculation on my part. You know, every one of them could have done the right thing. I'm just telling you, human nature is. We were talking, the Bible is, it's not that the Bible, I'm saying the Bible is wrong here. You know, we understand human nature and know that in a group that size, there probably were some that that took the oath that did not keep up with that oath, okay? That's all I'm saying. All right. Verse 13. Verse 13. Also I shook my lap and said, so God shake out every man from his house and from his labor that performeth not this promise. Even thus be he shaken out and emptied. And all the congregation said amen and praised the Lord. And the people did according to the promise. Now, okay, Ryan, what's happening? He says, I shook my lap. Basically, it's just a symbolic shaking. Basically, what he's saying is symbolic of this. May God shake you out of everything that you own if you do not keep your oath. I mean, that's what Nehemiah is pronouncing, what he would like to have happen if they did not keep their oath, and that is lose everything. And lose everything. If you don't empty yourselves, I'm asking God to take everything from you. So you're either going to empty it on your own, or I'm asking God to empty you. One of the two. If you empty it on your own, you will return to wealth. That will be fine. God will get you. God will return to you anything that you give in love. He will return to you in such a huge way. Not necessarily financially, but certainly spiritually, financially, physically, mentally, emotionally. He returns all that, and it is a beautiful thing to behold, praise God. Keeping you healthy, keeping your heart beating, your blood flowing, all of those things like that. Those are miracles of God, and praise God for them. But Nehemiah says, this is what I want to happen. I hope you don't keep a thing. Hope you lose it all if you won't keep your oath. Man, those were some tough words. And I can assure you that God intended for them to keep that oath. One more verse. Moreover, from the time that I was appointed to be their governor in the land of Judah, from the 20th year until the 2 and 30th year of Artaxerxes the king, 12 years, and my brethren have not eaten the bread of the governor. Nehemiah says, I'm not taking, actually a few more verses, but Nehemiah says, I'm not taking the bread from the governor. I'm not eating what they're sending. I'm giving that to the people. I'm paying out of my own pocket. Plus, he was taking, and we'll see in just a minute, he was taking people under his own table. He was paying for that. He said, I'm paying my own way. I'm giving you guys the food to eat, meaning the people that were working. Verse 10, I likewise and my brethren and my servants might exact of the money and corn. I pray you, let us leave off this interest. All right. Basically saying, I have the right to eat of this bread. I'm going to give it to you. And anything that I give them, I'm not going to charge them interest for it. I'm not going to do it. If they can pay back, please. But I'm not going to charge them interest for it. I have a right to eat of the king's table. I have a right to eat of the bread he sends here. But I'm not going to do that. Verse 11, restore, I pray you, to them, even this day, their lands, their vineyards, and their houses. I'm sorry, we've already read that. Verse 13, shook my lap. Verse 14, moreover, the time that I appointed their governor of the land of Judah from the 20th year, even unto 2 and 30th year of Artaxerxes. That's what we just went over, 12 years. And my brethren, I have not eaten of the bread of the governor. I would not eat of the bread of the governor. I would not eat what came from him. And I refused to do so. Verse 15, but the former governors that had been before me were chargeable unto the people, and had taken of them bread and wine, beside 40 shekels of silver. Yea, even their servants bear rule over the people, but so did not I. He said, governors before that you have known have certainly taken. Look at Congress today. Look at Congress today. How much money they exact from the people, not just their salaries, but all that they get on the side, underneath the table. These monies coming from China, all of these things. It is awful. But Nehemiah says, look, not only did those governors take from you, but the people who worked under the governors took from you. He said, I am not going to do that. and it was purely from his love and his fear of the Lord, reverence for the Lord. Okay, that's what he says. Verse 16, trying to get to this last verse. I want to finish chapter 5. Yea, also I continued in the work on this wall, neither bought we any land, and all my servants gathered thither unto the work. When he says neither bought we any land, he said, I didn't go in there, and when you were suffering and you had your land at a dirt cheap price because you couldn't eat, I didn't go in there buying any of that. I didn't do that. After World War II, George Soros, and it was a few years past World War II, he was a young man, but he went in and he started buying up. And he himself is Jewish by blood, but he went in and started buying Jewish lands from Jews who had been killed in the Holocaust. He started buying up their homes and their land and all that stuff and making tons and tons of the money he uses to destroy our nation today. He started with money off of the backs of dead Jews. What an awful, awful man. What an awful, awful man. So here we go. All right, so Nehemiah, verse 17. Verse 17 says, Moreover, there were at my table 150 of the Jews and rulers, beside those that came unto us from among the heathen that are about us. He said he put 150 people at his table when he ate, and he paid for it all out of his own pocket. Here's the good thing here. Here's the good thing here. It says, Now which was prepared for me daily was 1 ox, 6 choice sheep. Also fowls were prepared for me. Once in 10 days, stores of all sorts of wine. Yet for all this required not I the bread of the governor. I paid for it myself, he says, because the bondage was heavy upon the people. Woo, what a Bible study. Verse 19, Think upon me, my God. He's praying. Think upon me, my God, for good to all that I've done for this people. This is not to brag. He is speaking a prayer to God, and he says, God, I'm taking care of this myself. Please, bless me as a result. Here's the thing. Nehemiah simply wanted to do the will of God. That's what Nehemiah was about. He simply wanted to do the will of God. He wanted to do the will of God according to the people and helping them. He wanted to do the will of God and building this wall. And here it was. He was working for the secular Persia. He was Daniel working for the secular Babylon. Nehemiah Ezra working for the secular Persia. And then Nehemiah working for the secular Persia. Here it is, and look, they were in secular jobs, but God has still got his people in the midst of secular jobs, and I promise you, they are, in fact, spreading God's word amongst their people, okay? They are a great influence, a great and godly influence right there in their secular jobs. All Nehemiah wants to do, all we want to do, in retaking this culture for Jesus Christ, all we want to do is do the will of God and to make sure we're telling every man, woman, boy, and girl about a cross where Jesus died for their sins, shed his blood for their sins. We've got to change this culture. We can. Doesn't mean that everything's going to be perfect, not till heaven, but it does mean we can be going in the right direction, praise God. So I hope you'll figure out a way to be involved. I hope you'll figure out a way to get the message of Jesus Christ into whatever it is that you're doing. Next week we'll start chapter 6. I love you guys. We'll see you. Bye-bye.